Huston, and this is the Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast, our weekly look at the area athletic scene, what happened last week, and what's going on this week. I'm here with my partner, Dan Youngblood, and tonight, Dan, we're just going to take a quick look around the area, baseball, softball, and track, talk about some of the top athletes that we've seen thus far and their prospects heading into postseason play.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this time of year, there's plenty to talk about. We've got baseball and softball both winding down their district seasons. Track, most of our all of our districts just finished their district meets. They're heading into area meets, and with hopes of going to regionals and then state. So a lot of kids right now are kind of hitting the home stretch of their seasons, and kind of we're going to find out pretty quick, you know, what kind of seasons they're going to have, just in terms of team success, individual success, and like you said, postseason success. So. A really fun time of year, and this time of year, there's never a shortage of things to talk about. So we'll hit some of those topics tonight.
All right. Before we jump into this week's show, we need to thank our primary sponsor, Capital Farm Credit, with offices all over Texas, including Stanford and Abilene. Buy your own slice of Texas with Capital Farm Credit. Together, we're better. And with that, it is time to jump into this week's show. We want to talk about our area leaders in baseball, softball, and track, but we do in the current events department. One thing that we cannot let slip past us, Dallas Huston from Brownwood has announced his retirement. And both you and I have met Dallas. We've worked with him a number of times over the years. And I'm sad to see him hang it up because he's a wonderful guy, a wonderful man, a class act, and a true professional, and probably the greatest play-by-play man the big country has ever produced.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly on that list. I can't think off the top of my head of anyone who would land on atop his name on that list. So you're talking about a guy who's been doing it for a very long time for one program. If you ever have a question about Brownwood athletics, he's the guy to ask, because he's been there so long and seen so much that he's basically a walking encyclopedia of Brownwood athletics. So it is definitely going to be sad. I'm sure, particularly for those in that Brownwood community, to turn on a game and not hear his voice. That's going to be a really jarring experience next year when that happens. So it's tough to see him go. He's a guy we had on one of our first podcasts when we started Big Country Preps. He was one that we wanted to talk to as early as we could, and he was gracious enough to come on here, and we really enjoyed getting to have that conversation with him. So it's just kind of bittersweet. You appreciate all that he did in this area. You appreciate getting to know him and getting to hear him call a game. But you're going to be sad to see him go, and it's going to just be different. It's going to be very different hearing somebody else call those games.
I've been working big country athletics since 06, 15 years, and every Friday night, forever, driving down the highway, listening to Dallas Huston on my way back from a ball game. It was just, I would always turn the radio on and go straight to listen to Dallas and how Brownwood was doing. Just not going to seem the same.
Just kind of a privilege, I think, for Brownwood to have been able to listen to that type of announcer for so long. He's a guy that
he's a big market talent. He's a big market talent who decided to stay in a small market.
Yeah, and brought a professionalism to his games that you don't always get at that level. So when you listen to him, you were going to know exactly what was going on in the field, and I think that anyone who had a chance to listen to him is thankful for that experience, and we're definitely going to miss him. It's going to be a big loss for the big country.
I always enjoyed listening to a play-by-play man who had an element of fearlessness to them, a guy who was not afraid to compliment a good play by the bad guys, the opposing team, and really let you know who was playing well from for the other guys. I've never been able to stomach a radio play-by-play man who was scared to take that chance, who felt that they always had to just, to suck up to the home team. Now, granted, when you listen to Dallas over the years, you knew that, he wanted Brownwood to do well and win, but he was never this homer that just got on there and felt like they had to suck up to whoever they were covering. He was always a pro, and I was always courageous, and those are the guys that I like listening to the most.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. He's just a pro, and he's a guy that, yes, you could tell it was a Brownwood broadcast, and that's fine. You should be able to tell that it's a hometown broadcast, sure. But it wasn't such done in a way that denigrated the opponent. It wasn't done in a way that blew smoke up the blew.
No, let's keep rolling. No. What were you going to say?
It wasn't done in a way. It
Um,
wasn't done in a way
the
that
censor, yeah, they
insulted the
call the
listeners.
censors on that one.
Yeah, it wasn't done in a way that insulted the listeners. It was done in a way that I mean, he was gonna tell you how it was, but he was gonna do it in a way that was always respectful to what was happening on the field. He wasn't gonna, call out kids or those sorts of things either. I just really appreciate a guy who was able to do what he was able to do for that long, and a guy that lived and breathed Brownwood sports. It was
Yeah.
just a remarkable career on a broadcasting career for him.
And with that, we're going to take a look around the area. We'll start with baseball and some of the top players and top teams that we have seen thus far. Dan, I think at the top of that list, I think the Jim Ned Indians are going to be that. It's the first team that you have to mention among those that have been playing really well thus far.
Yeah, and really there are several. And I think the thing that's kind of interesting is we've now gotten to a point in baseball, softball, track seasons, particularly track, obviously, with its just past district, but in all of these seasons where there's a big enough sample now that you can draw some pretty strong conclusions as to the strength of certain teams, certain players. And Jim Ned at this point, I mean, when you look at what they've done for how long they've done it, you've got to consider them, in my opinion, a state tournament threat for sure. And then you look around the area, some of the other teams that look like they have maybe the ability to make a run. Obviously, Albany's been there for a while. They've got pitching that makes them, I think, a threat. And then in that same district, you've got an Anson team that was ranked in the top 10 earlier this year that has also put together a really good season, a little higher classification. Wiley is a top 15 team in 5A. And here's the one thing about these, and it's not surprising, with all four of those teams, you look at those teams, and the one common thread with all of them is the pitching depth that each of them have. And when you have that type of pitching depth,
Yes.
you don't necessarily need it Tuesday and Friday through the regular season. When you have that type of pitching depth, it makes you so much tougher in the playoffs where you have the potential to go to a third game. And that's why I think all of these teams, when you can throw that many starters out that they can go and keep you in a game, you always have a chance. And that's what's been fun for me to watch and to kind of follow these teams is just the amount of pitching that each of these teams have. And I think there's the depth of pitching that makes them dangerous as a team.
Well, that's why we see so many over the years. That's why we've seen so many of our top teams get bounced early in baseball with the best of three series. A team that can normally dominate with two strong pitchers on Tuesday and Friday nights all of a sudden finds himself in a situation where they've got to find that third starter, and some of them don't have it. Yeah. They run out of pitching. And all of a sudden, a team that had been dominating all year long is gone. And in the case of Jim Ned, they go about 6 deep. That this is a ball club that we're talking about a lot of good pitching. It goes beyond Tate Yardley. The Blaine Palmer kid is a great pitcher. Luke Benson is another one. They have guys that can come off the bench and throw strikes, and they go about 6 or 7 deep. And once you get into the postseason, you really have to have that if you're going to make it a Round Rock, unless you win every coin flip.
Yeah, and that's the thing. What having the depth does is it gives you a margin for error. Because you mentioned we've had lots of teams over the years that had 2 really good pitchers. The problem with that is if you don't win those series, if you don't sweep those series, all of a sudden you're sweating in game 3. And some of those teams have good enough offenses to where they can survive, where they don't need a shutdown performance in game 3. But sometimes you just flat run out of pitching, and all of a sudden you're having to score 10 or 12 runs to win that third game. And that's not a position you want to be in the playoffs. And that's something I think puts Jim Ned in a situation as far as big country teams in that classification. I think that's what kind of gives them the edge in this region over our other teams anyways, that they can go, like you said, 3-4 deep with quality starting pitching. And Wiley's the same way. But at the top, you've got Dash Albus, you've got Brooks Gay, both of whom are having great seasons. Gay in particular has been just nails for them through district. And then behind them, you've got 3 or 4 guys that have really done a good job out of their bullpen that are also capable of stretching out and starting. And they're going to get a big shot in the arm. They've got Walker Pyland, a D1 baseball signee. He's going to go play at ACU, who they really haven't been able to throw much this year because of some elbow troubles. And he's working his way back. So come playoff time, you're going to have 3 guys who have playoff experience, starting playoff experience, which – when you think about the COVID shutdown last year is a huge benefit. And I think Jim Ned's kind of the same way. Tate Yardley is one of those guys who's been doing it for years. And in Albany, we mentioned them. Caden Eve. That's the thing that's impressive looking at our list of pitchers.
Well, there's one team we have to throw out. There's one team we have to throw out, and you haven't thrown them out. I mean, we did mention them a second ago. But pound for pound, now they're only a Class 2A, when you in terms of depth, pound for pound, the Anson Tigers may have as much pitching depth as anybody.
Yeah,
At least for a Class 2A, it's pretty extraordinary the amount of depth that they have. It goes well beyond Trevor Miller.
Yeah, no, I mentioned them earlier. That is a team with a ton of pitching depth, and a team that I think obviously had the setback there against Albany, but there's no shame in Albany. We mentioned that Cade Neves, a guy who helped them,
and he threw that night.
They lost to Cade Neves. State. Yeah, he helped lead them to state, 3 years ago. So these are all teams, and that's one thing that impressed me looking at kind of our stat leaders we put out is how many of these guys have been doing it for years. We mentioned Albus, we mentioned Brooks Gay, we mentioned Walker Pyland for Wiley. All three of those guys were on their playoff team 3 years ago, in 2018, before the COVID shutdown. Tate Yardley, you mentioned Trevor Miller, Lane Pallage at DeLeon's a kid who may be our most talented pitcher of all of them.
He might be our best pitcher in the entire area.
And he was putting up a 1 and change ERA as a sophomore 3 years ago. So that's the thing that's really impressive. You got a bunch of these kids that have been doing it for years and that do have that playoff experience. And I think, again, that's going to give their teams a huge advantage this year because you're going to have a lot of kids who lost that last year with COVID.
Top pitchers thus far, Lane Pallage has got to be up there at the top of that list. Yardley has got to be mentioned. Neve has got to be mentioned. Pallage leads the area with 71 strikeouts. And let me double check this. Let me double check the number of innings pitched. 71 Ks in 28 innings.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's bringing it. And for the record, they have gunned this kid, this lefty, at over 90 miles an hour. And he's typically in that high 80s, 90 mile an hour range. And when you get a lefty that has that kind of stuff, and he's got good breaking stuff as well, he's already throwing a splitter.
Yeah,
we might be seeing this kid pitching at the next level and throwing well at the next level.
I think we'll definitely see him pitch at the next level, and he's one of several of these guys who's really talented and been doing it for years. Just my personal impression is probably the best pitcher I've seen this year so far. What I would probably have to say is Gay from Wiley. He's another kid that throws in the high 80s. And his strikeout numbers are getting pretty impressive as well. He's up over 50 in the mid-30s innings range. So at the Class 5A level, that's impressive. But Pallage, I got to agree. I mean, I don't think pound for pound you're going to have trouble finding a more dominant pitcher in our area. His strikeout numbers are ludicrous.
You're the offensive guy. You love offense. So we need to touch on that subject. The Clyde Bulldogs this year, they've got two of the three top hitters in our area, and Luke Chorn and Dylan Newman. And Dylan's been doing this for quite a while. He's been a varsity guy forever.
Yeah, he's one of those that seems like he's been there forever because he's been at the top of their pitching rotation too. He's another one of those that we were talking about earlier, kids who've just been doing it for so long. But yeah, he's another guy that come playoff time, he gives you a chance on the mound. And the way they're hitting, they have a chance to be a dangerous team in the playoffs too. They had a rough game against Jim Ned last week, but we've talked about Jim Ned. Everybody's having rough games against them this year, it seems like.
A guy that's flying under the radar up in Breckenridge, and we need to take our hat off to him, is Jonas Ariano. He's one of the area's top hitters at 553, but he's also one of the area's top pitchers. He's been throwing really well. He comes into this week with a 0.48 ERA, which is second in the entire area. He's just a stud athlete. He was one of the top football players up in Breck, and he's one of the area's top baseball players in 2021.
Yeah, and what's interesting about him is he's one of the few holdovers they had from last year's team, which I think, talking to a lot of the 3A coaches, thought that group had a legitimate chance at winning a state tournament. But they lost so many seniors from that team. He's one of the guys that's kind of was part of the previous nucleus that's part of this one this year as well. The thing that's been interesting about Breckenridge is they've kind of managed – they're not the same as they were last year, but they've managed to put together a pretty nice season. And you talk about Ariano, he's one of the big reasons for it. And then Chad Wilcox is another pitcher with a sub-3 ERA that's done a really nice job for him. But that, I think, has gotten to a point where it's a program now that can survive a bunch of graduation losses and still be very competitive. And I think that's been really impressive because they lost a really good opportunity last year to COVID.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people think they would have won a state championship last year. That was the general consensus around here, that they were Round Rock bound, and I believe that they would have been. They were loaded. This year's ball club, they've lost the majority of the talent from last year, especially in the pitching department. Ariano is still there among them. Are they as good as they were last year? Are they on that level that they were where they would have been last year or the year before that even? I don't think so. I think they're too young. But I tell you what, the level that they're playing at right now, I think it's indicative of the job that Coach Bartlett has done. The program has arrived. I think that they could make a nice run in the playoffs this year. But the program is I mean, they got hit hard by graduation. They lost a lot of talent.
And I think the thing that's really a tribute to Coach Bartlett, to this Coach Bartlett and the program that he's built is when you look at how much they've improved over the course of this season. I think you're right. When you lose as many players as they did who were in key roles, and I saw that team go and beat a good Alito team in an exhibition at the end of the season. This was a really good Breckenridge team we're talking about. You lose all the pieces they lost off that team, bring in basically a whole new squad. It's going to take a little bit of time to gel and come together. And you've watched them, they've done that throughout district play. They've really played well in district. So it's been fun to watch this team build, and it's been fun to kind of see them transition from the last nucleus to this one. I tend to agree. Are they on the level they were at last year? I don't think anybody would say
I don't think it's a fair comparison.
No,
I don't even think it's fair to compare them.
Exactly. You know? I'd agree. But I think this team in its own right, when you look at the improvement it's made and the way it's playing with the talent and experience that level that they have, it's really impressive.
All right, two ball clubs, Dan, that we probably should mention, and I think it's important to mention them, are Brock and Wall. One of the ball clubs that we think is going to go to Round Rock or has an excellent chance to get there is Jim Ned. Well, guess what? Two of the biggest threats to prevent them from getting there are right in our coverage area. We cover both Wall and Brock, and these are two of the traditional powers in our area, and they're going to be threats. They're going to be two of the ball clubs that Jim Ned's going to have to get through, and both of them are starting to improve and play better ball down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, I think outside of Shallow Water, which was putting together a really nice season, I think that Brock and Wall have to be considered two of the biggest threats. Holiday's having a pretty nice season out of District 7 too, but the thing that's interesting about Wall and Brock in particular is both these teams, if you'd have looked at their records before district play started, you'd think to yourself, gosh, those teams are way down. And then you look at what they've done since district play started, and Wall sitting there right below Jim Ned, and they're in the district standings there. Brock is at the top of the District 8 standings with a really, really solid early team chasing them there. So, I mean, these are teams that part of the deal is that these teams schedule well. You know they're going to play a tough non-district schedule. They're going to test themselves there, and they're going to incur some losses there, particularly when they have a team that's not quite up to where it has been the past few years. However, there are also teams that by the time district rolls around, by the time playoff rolls around, they're playing their best baseball, and their best baseball is usually pretty good. So it's been fun to see the just kind of the way those teams have come together through district, and I'm excited to see what they can do in postseason play, because I think both those teams are dangerous, especially because of their history. These are teams that expect to win, so when they get to the playoffs, there's nobody that they're going to be afraid of. So it's going to be fun to watch. That Region 1 3A bracket is always a really fun one to watch in baseball, and I think this year's going to be no different.
And with that, it's time to jump into softball. And you and I, before we went on the air, we were talking about pitching, area pitching. And I was frank in my reply, and I'll be frank here. I don't think this year, with the exception of Silali Gutierrez from Stanford, from what I've seen thus far, I don't think it's a vintage year for pitching talent in the big country. I think that a lot of our pitching talent in softball is quite young and hasn't really hit its peak yet. Gutierrez is there already, but we have a lot of young pitchers with potential. But right now, this is not a vintage year for pitching in the big country, and because of that, outside of Stanford, I don't know that we have a potential state champ in the area this year. If I were to rate somebody as having the best chance of winning a state championship in the big country, it'd be the Stanford Bulldogs because of Gutierrez.
Yeah, and I think I'd agree with you there. The one thing that's kind of interesting this year is that the big country has lost a lot in the past 2 or 3 years, has graduated a lot of really dominant, high velocity pitchers. It seems like this year there's some good pitchers there. Don't get us wrong. I mean, there's some pitchers, you look at their ERAs and their numbers, and they've put together really nice seasons, but it seems like it's maybe more of a collection of there's a little bit more finesse pitchers. They're not, the velocity is not quite where it's been. So their girls have to rely more on, spotting the ball and on their defense. But Silali's the one girl that she can go out there and she's going to get her Ks and she can dominate a game. And I think that's what makes Stanford so dangerous, is when you, especially in softball, you can throw your starter over and over and over again. If teams have to face Gutierrez in a state semifinal, state championship game scenario, I mean, she's got a chance to will Stanford to a state championship. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I don't know if there are any other pitchers in the area this year that have that. There are some other good ones. Again, I don't want to downplay
one that we should mention is Melanie Middleton from Brock is throwing pretty well. She is second in the big country in strikeouts with 141, and that's in 99 innings pitched. So she's one of the few true power pitchers that we have this year outside of Gutierrez. But you are right. That's one thing that's noticeable. Almost the common thread that I've seen in most of our pitchers thus far this year is most of them are finesse pitchers. The people put the ball in play a lot against them, and that's fine as long as you're backing them up with defense. If you're making mistakes behind them, you're going to get beat.
Yeah, and there are girls who've done a really good job doing that, and girls who've led their teams to really nice starts to the season. You look at EULA, where McKenna Oglesby's got a sub-2 ERA. You look at Sweetwater, you've got Jenica Fuentes and Eliana Perez, who have both done a good job for them and have helped them race out to a district lead. So there's some pitchers out there who have done a really nice job, and there's some teams who I think have really surprised. But I do tend to agree with you that as far as the power type, traditional dominant power pitcher, we don't have a whole lot of those this year. But that doesn't mean you can't make a playoff run. It just means it makes it harder, because when you do have that type of pitcher, you go into every game feeling like you can hold that team to 1, 2, 0 runs, and you don't need your lineup to do quite as much to get a win.
In high school softball, one of the most one stat that you can, I don't know, I tend to throw it out the window, is the ERA. It really doesn't tell you much, because if you're putting the ball in play against a pitcher a lot and the team behind them is making mistakes, the ERA really doesn't tell you much. It's really how many runs you're giving up per game, whether they're earned or unearned. At the end of the day, that's what's going to get you beat. So a lot of our pitchers have impressive ERAs, but at the end of the day, you still may see 4 or 5 runs tallied. And once you start getting into the playoffs, you start facing these teams that are accustomed to power pitching. They're going to be putting the ball in play a lot. So, our goals, if we're going to get a team to Round Rock this year anyway, we're going to have to find a team outside of Stanford that plays really solid defensively.
Yeah, and that's something we've noticed over the years too, is that we've had a lot of really good solid teams from our area either often make it to the state semifinals, where they run into that type of pitcher you're talking about, and all of a sudden they just get overwhelmed. So
it's over. Yeah.
Once you get to Round Rock, power is an asset, both in the circle and at the plate. These are teams that can crush the ball, and they're teams that have pitchers that can go out there and shut you down. So, but I think that just speaks also to just how difficult it is to win a state championship, because the teams that do that talent matters, obviously, and the most talented teams, once you get to Round Rock, you're playing some really, really good talent. So we'll see. I am excited to see Citlali pitch in the playoffs. That's something we got deprived of last year with COVID.
Yes.
I'm excited to see how far she can take the Stanford team, which is really playing well around her. It's been fun to watch them put this together.
All right, let's talk about some of the top offensive powers that we had this year. Dan, every year in and year out, I don't know what they're doing, how they do it, but every year the Clyde Lady Bulldogs are amongst the most powerful offensive teams that we have in the area. And this year is no different. Right up at the top of our hitters list, we've got Maddie Kirksey hitting .690. We've got Paige Puryear hitting .593. Both of them in our top 6 hitters in the big country. And this is typical. This goes back as far as I can think. I don't know how Clyde manages every year, but they're always at least an offensive power.
And Clyde's another of those interesting ones. We talked about Wall and Brock and the baseball side of teams that got off to kind of sluggish starts by their standards and have kind of picked it up in district. Clyde's another one of those teams. They got off to a pretty rocky start in non-district with, you remember they obviously lost some really good pitching over the last 2 years. Some girls
Yes.
who were those types of dominant power pitchers we talked about, that they graduated off that roster, and it's taken them some time to put things together. And they're in a hellacious district to try to do that again. You've got a Merkel team that's off to a fantastic start, leading that district currently. Jim Ned, which is a resurgent program that's really making a nice case for himself this year. And then Ballinger, who you saw beat Jim Ned last week. So, and then Clyde's right there in that mix. So you've got a team that's really trying to make hay in a very tough district. And Clyde's managed to really turn things on in district play, and they kind of put themselves into that playoff picture. But you are right. That team can flat hit the ball. This year's team is kind of trying to figure out some things in the circle, but their offense gives them a chance. And I think if they make the playoffs, that's going to be a big part of it.
And you mentioned two of the more interesting ball clubs this year. First place at the top of that list is Merkel in that district. This is the best Merkel team that we've seen in years. So they're one of the surprises. They're one of the surprises of the area, but also Jim Ned bears mentioning. Erica Jones has taken over a Jim Ned program, and Erica goes back a way. She had a tremendous program at Clyde. She went to Anson for a year or two, and then she's taken this job at Jim Ned, taking over a Class 3A program that has lost really basically since 2011. They haven't been to a regional semi since 2011. They've only been to the playoffs once in a decade. So she's taken over this perennially suffering program and bringing her, her high level of enthusiasm. It's going to be interesting to see what she does with this program if given time. They're already fighting for a number 2 seed in basically her first year. Last year was her first year, but they lost the entire thing to COVID, as we all know. But that program is going to take a step forward. Merkel already is. That's one of the top stories of the year.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think that Merkel team's been really fun to watch. They entered this week at 18-3. Undefeated in district. So you're talking about a team that's and they've done it against good quality competition when you talk about Jim Ned, Ballinger, and Clyde. So Merkel's definitely been one to follow, and that has so far been one of the biggest stories of the spring in the big country. And I look forward to seeing what they can do in the playoffs as well.
I'm troubled by the fact that we do not. Typically, most of our top teams this year are winning. We're seeing a lot of games 10-7, 12-9, 8-4, whatever, but we're not seeing 7-0, 8-0, 8-1, whatever. Those are the numbers. Those are the scores you look at for teams that have a shot at making a deep playoff run. That's what's troubling me about this group of teams that we've got this year, which I think overall is fairly young, at least in the pitching department. So it's difficult to score your way to Austin. It just is. We've seen teams do it, but it's difficult.
Yeah. And I think to some degree, it just kind of depends on what your definition of a deep playoff run is. I mean, if you're talking about getting to the state tournament, that's a tall ask, particularly for a team that doesn't have that type of dominant pitching. But if you look at some of the teams throughout the area, we mentioned Merkel as being one that's been a big surprise. You look, Sweetwater's another one I think is going to be really fun to watch. They've gotten off to a really strong start in district. They're playing a really good softball. And there are several teams like that I think have an opportunity to make it 2 or 3 rounds, which I think would be a really successful season for a lot of those programs.
Sure it would be. Absolutely.
Cahoma's one of those that we saw make it to state years ago when they had that type of dominant pitcher, but they're off to a good start. They're a team that can make a nice little playoff run. So I think it kind of depends. And then you've got Brock, who once they get to the playoffs, I think they're the real wild card because they've made those types of runs so often before. So Brock's the one team that I think if they get into the playoffs, and you mentioned they've got a pitcher who can go out there and get strikeouts for them, they're that one team that I see other than Stanford that because of their history and because of some of the pieces they have in that roster, I'm interested to see how they do once they get into the playoffs. But they're another team that's in a tough district. You look at, they just dropped a game to Eastland, and Comanche's got a solid team behind them as well. So
one thing Brock's offensive consistency isn't what it has been this year. They are getting pitching. Millen is doing a good job, but I mean Eastland shut them down the other day. I did not see that one coming.
No, Brock's one of those teams. They used to put up buku runs too. They're a team that used to put up, they used to run roll people frequently with the offenses they had. So, but I'm interested to see what that team does once it gets into a playoff environment, just because they've had so much success there over the years. But there are lots of teams in the area that I'm excited to see come playoff time, just because I think they have a chance for their program to kind of move a step forward, to get to maybe get into a 3rd round, maybe even get into a 4th round game. I think that would be a really big deal. But getting to Austin is going to be a tall task for a lot of these teams, just for the reason we mentioned. It's just so difficult, like you said, to slug your way to a state tournament. You've got to have pitching that can go out and shut down the opposition. And some of these pitchers are capable of going out and giving a good outing, but they're going to need more help from their defense than maybe some of the ones we've seen in the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that sooner or later you will run into that dominating pitcher. On the way to state, you're going to run into one, and you're going to have to win a ball game 2-1 or 3-2. And if you're accustomed to winning 10-7 and, slugging your way to wins, okay, that's fine. But sooner or later, you're going to have to be able to scratch one out, 2-1, 3-2, and play excellent defense behind a finesse pitcher. you're going to have to be able to win a ball game like that. If you're going to get it, if you're going to get to Austin, you're going to have to be able to win ball games like that. And that's what makes it difficult if, if your team is built around slugging its way to victories and you're unaccustomed to having to play really tight defense to win ball games.
And we've seen that a lot over the years. I mean, we get teams, once you get into even a region final, a state semifinal, you find yourself down 4-1 in the second inning, and all of a sudden it may be over at that point. So like that's one thing we've seen a lot of over the years is where teams that, like you said, are accustomed to be able to slug their way, get out to big leads, and get. That doesn't happen once you face that type of pitching. So you've got to be able to really tighten it up and be able to win that 2-1 game, or to be able to win that 3-2 game, like you mentioned, because if you fall behind 5-1 in a state semifinal game, a lot of times that you missed your opportunity. So
a dominant pitcher changes the game completely.
Mm-hmm.
It completely changes the game.
Yep.
If you have a girl out there that can really throw, mid 60s or high 60s, and with stuff on it, can throw a rise, can throw a drop. It just totally changes the game, and if you can't keep up with it, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and that's the thing at all levels of baseball and softball. I mean, pitching's the name of the game. If you have dominant pitching, you're going to have a chance, and that's one thing that I'm not sure we have in abundance this year. Just in terms of, like we talked about, that power pitcher, but it'll still be fun to see kind of what our teams are able to do, and those teams that have that power pitcher, it's going to be fun to see if they're able to ride that maybe to that type of run, to a state semifinal.
I think we have two true power pitchers this year that I would define as power pitchers. That's Gutierrez of Stanford and Middleton of Brock. Those are a couple of pitchers that can get out there and strike out 10 or 12 people or more per game, which takes so much pressure off of your defense. A lot of people say the strikeouts are overrated. I disagree with them. I think they're worth their weight in gold. They take so much pressure off of your defense. If you're eliminating half of your outs via the K and preventing base runners from moving and advancing in that process, it's incalculable.
Yeah, here's the thing: is you can have success without being a high strikeout pitcher. There are people have proven that over the years, but strikeouts again give you such a larger margin for error. But that's why at the highest levels of baseball in particular, they value guys with swing and miss stuff, because like you said, it just takes a ton of pressure off your defense. Your guys can sit in the middle of the field with their gloves on their heads if you got a pitcher that's going out and striking out 15 guys. So, again, and the other thing too is in high school baseball and softball, unlike the high D1 college level or the pros, is the defenses. Even the best defense is going to make some mistakes behind you. So you're going to have.
Even if the defense is flawless, behind a finesse pitcher, that's fine. And I like finesse pitchers. I've always enjoyed watching a good sinker slider guy or a crafty left-hander. I've always enjoyed watching that, or a softball pitcher with a good changeup that can spot the ball. I've always enjoyed that. But the thing is, with a finesse pitcher, even if the defense is flawless behind you, guess what? The base runners advance.
Yeah.
You put the ball in play, and often your base runners are advancing. Yeah. So that's the one weakness. And then the strength of strikeouts, it keeps the base runners where they're at.
And not only that, batted balls find holes. It's going to happen by. You sometimes it just finds a hole. That's you seeing eye single, a worm burner through the middle of the infield, and all of a sudden that becomes a base runner, which becomes a run. Whereas if you have a pitcher that can go out there and strike out 10 or 12 people a game, you don't have that as much to worry about. But so I think we're on the same wavelength here. I think that strikeouts. If you have that type of pitcher, no coach is ever going to turn down a guy or a girl who can go out there and really dominate a lineup. But at the same time, you have to work with what you've got. And a lot of times there are a lot of really good pitchers, even at the highest levels, who have found ways to get outs without being able to go out there and get strikeouts. But it does put an additional pressure on both them and their teams to be a little bit finer.
All right. With that, we're going to jump into track and field. But before we do that, we want to thank the sponsors that make this show possible. We want to thank, first and foremost, Capital Farm Credit, who brings you these Wednesday night podcasts free of charge throughout the school year. Also, for the Love of the Game Broadcasting, our old friend Terry Slavens, owner of KLAX 93.5 FM out of Breckenridge, KATX 97.7 FM out of Eastland, Classic Country AM 1330 out of Graham, KWKQ 94.7 FM out of Graham, KROO 1430 AM out of Breck, and 98.5 FM KWBY out of Ranger. That is for the Love of the Game Broadcasting. Also, Phil Hill of the Abilene Realtors Group, big supporter of local athletics. If you're in the market, give him a shout at 325-669-5153 or visit his website at philhillproperties.com. And finally, the 4 Cent Oil Patch Cafe. You know, every town in the big country has that one place where everybody says, you know what, if you're in this town, that's the place to go and eat. Well, guess what? In 4 Cent, it is the Oil Patch Cafe. Some of the best home cooking in the big country and a big supporter of Buffalo athletics. You can reach them at 432-457-0146. That is the 4 Cent Oil Patch Cafe. And with that, Dan, I'll tell you what, let's take a look at some of the top performers thus far in track and field. We'll start on the boys' side, and I think if you're going to start talking about guys that may have a shot at taking home the gold in Austin, I'm going to throw a name out. I'll throw one from Wiley, your area of expertise. I think if you're going to talk about a guy that can potentially win a state championship, Kyler Aguilar of Wiley, pole vaulter, 15.9 thus far, and he's overcome some adversity to get there.
Yeah, no, I mean that right now is the leading height in Region 1-5A, and this is a kid
by a wide margin.
Yeah, and you mentioned he has been through some adversity. He had kind of a rare bone disorder, kind of derail his sophomore season, lost his junior season like all of our athletes did to COVID. And then so this year, was coming into his senior year, wanting to really finish strong, and has. So it's been a very nice story for Kyler Aguilar, a kid who is from a track family. Both of his parents were track athletes. He takes pole vaulting very, very seriously. He's going to be competing collegiately at Harding University for Coach Don D. Hood, who was formerly at ACU. So this is a kid, definitely a name to watch. If he goes and performs the way he's capable of, he's one I would expect to make it to Austin and to have a chance to do really well there, which would be a really neat story because it kind of come full circle for him after having that really breakout freshman season, have to go through some obstacles in getting to his senior year. It would be pretty neat if he could finish it with a state medal again.
We have a sub 40 300 hurdler out in Sweetwater, Harrison Foster, and I think that's a name that you have to throw out as a guy who could be seen on the medal stand in Austin.
Yeah, and he's another interesting story because he's he is a true multi-sport athlete. I think he plays about 4 sports over there. He plays a good basketball player, a really good football player, receiver for the football team. He also plays a little baseball when he's not running track. So you're talking about a kid who is that true high school multi-sport athlete. And this year he's really taken a huge step forward on the track on both hurdles events. I think he has our top time in the 300 hurdles, which you mentioned, sub 40. And I think he has our second best time in the 110s. So definitely an athlete to watch.
I tell you, the Brock Eagles are a threat to win state championships or at least medal in every relay event that we've got. And in the 400 relay, they've got the best time, and that's 6A, 5A included. They've got the best time in the big country at 42.57. Also in the 800 relay, Brock is right there, right behind Abilene, a Class 6A Abilene. Brock has checked in the 800 relay at 130.82. And then we've got him in the 1600 relay as the top 3A relay team, but also the second best 1600 relay team in the big country at 329.32. These are all very solid times. And, you know, we could see the Eagles on a medal stand down there. It's possible.
And it's some kids, some names that you've heard. I mean, you're talking about Cash Jones, who was their 3,000-yard running back, who he's a big part of those, as well as running 100 meters. Luke Dillingham, who is a really good safety that's going to be playing at ACU next year and beyond. He's a really good 200-yard runner or 200-meter runner. So he's our area leader there. So some names that you've heard from other sports, particularly on the football field, that are really making some hay for their track team. And that's going to be interesting too. And then of course, with Nathan Jones, who's another one of those multi-sport guys, football, basketball, track. He's having a really nice season throwing the discus and shot put. So I would expect Brock to have a really a strong showing here, area, regional, and into state, and see if maybe they can do some damage there.
On the subject of shot put discus, Tate Williams of Wall bears mentioning. He's already set his school record at 57 8.5 in the shot put. He's also one of our top discus throwers, number 2 in the discus behind Garrett Dixon of Ballinger, but he's thrown the disc at 160.8. So this is a guy that could medal in both events and maybe even take gold. If he's throwing up to his full potential, I think he will take gold in the shot if he goes down to Austin and reaches his full potential.
Yeah, we mentioned how good a season Nathan Jones is having for Brock. Tate Williams' longest throw this year is 6 feet longer than Jones' best. So Jones is having a great season. He's setting records over there in Brock. Tate Williams is having a really potentially a record-setting season. If he can match that, like you said, toward the end of this season, I think there's a very good chance he could end his high school career on the medal stand in Austin.
All right, and with that, we're going to jump over to the girls' side in track and field. One name that flies off the leaderboard, and we do invite you to take a look at our track and field area leaders each week, which come out on Sunday night at BigCountryPreps.com. A name that flies off the board immediately is Tori Tyler of Brock, especially in the 800 meters, where she has run a 2:19.75, which is 8 seconds faster than anybody else in the entire area in any classification. This girl could very well take home a gold medal in state.
Yeah, Tori Tyler's a really interesting story this year. She was one of our top basketball players the past 2 seasons for Brock and decided this year to go devote her entire athletic schedule to track, and it's paid off. She's got our top time in the 400. You mentioned her 800 time, which is just superb. And she's going to be now have an opportunity after this year to go run track at Tech. So a very accomplished track athlete. It seems like she's made maybe the choice she's made has certainly turned out well for her. But she's going to be fun to watch finish out this but it's going to be fun to watch her finish out this senior season because she is having the type of year that could definitely get her to Austin and could have her leaving with some hardware. But that 800 meter time in particular, when you're like you said 8 seconds ahead of the next competitor, you're flying.
Yeah. Let's talk about some distance runners that might bring home the gold in Austin. And one of the names that flies off our leaderboard is in the Class 1A level, Carly Willison of Monday in the 1600 meters. She's our third best. She has our third best time in the 1600 at 5:44.26. But I mean, again, we're counting 4As, 5As, 6A athletes in there also. She's still got the third best time. But guess what? In the 3,200 meters, she has the best time in the big country. And not by a little bit, by a long, long shot at 12:07.22. She's going to be right up there with the best in the state in Class 1A with that time.
Yeah, and she was a great basketball player for Monday, and she's taking it to the track. And you mentioned it, her 3,200 time is about 19 seconds better than the next competitor. And then she's only behind Marin Murray of Abilene High and Emma Stegmoller of Brownwood when you talk about the mile. So you're talking about a 6A competitor and a 4A competitor, and she's only about a second behind the Brownwood girls. So her times put her, you would think, on the 1A level and in a very good position to do some damage once we do get to regionals and state.
All right, and here's a stunner. Here's a stunner. The top 100 hurdler is from Merkel. How many times have we seen a great hurdler from Merkel? What is with Merkel and hurdles? Alyssa O'Malley is the top hurdler in the big country right now in the 100 at 15:30, which is a pretty solid time. But we've had Katie Pursley out of Merkel. We've had the legendary Carly Zabot, a multiple state champ, out of Merkel. What is with Merkel and hurdles?
Well, Merkel girls track in general has done really well, so that's they're kind of just following that tradition there. But O'Malley's one of those girls, another one that excels in the basketball court. That's the thing. Looking at our track leaders, you see a whole lot of these girls that are really good basketball players too. So talking about just some really good athletes that are kind of finishing, and some of them in the seniors' case, finishing their high school careers with an opportunity to go and get to a regional meet or a state meet. It's pretty cool after watching all these girls on the hardwood and do what they were able to do in basketball.
Our fastest girl this year, Victoria Cameron of Stephenville at 12:26. That gives her a shot at getting through regional and getting to state at that time and doing well.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a sub 12:3, you're talking about a pretty fast time in that 100. So, yeah, she's one definitely to watch. Ashlyn Galvin from Jim Ned's one to watch. And then Reese Chambers, a 1A girl from May, her time's right up there too. She's another one that could be one to watch. Once
at the 1A level, a 12:66 is pretty dang quick.
Yeah, so it's gonna be fun. We got, as usual, our area is always well represented at the state meet, and I would expect this year to be no different. It's going to be fun watching these boys and girls get an opportunity to continue. And I always think it's fun just kind of seeing the whittling down process from the district to the area to the region to the state. Because once you get to region, you're talking about kids that are really, really good athletes universally. It's going to be fun to see how many of our kids were able to get to that level and then be able to get to state, because we'll have a bunch, and you just hope that all of our kids are able to maximize their potential and to do their best at the most important times.
And with that, it's about time to close the books on this week's Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast. But before we do that, we want to remind you that we got 3 separate subscription packages here at BigCountryPreps.com. We've got a monthly for $5 a month. We've got a 6-month semi-annual subscription where we knock that price down to $4 a month. And then we have an annual, a yearly subscription where we knock the price down to $3 a month, 12 months, $36 for a full year of Big Country High School athletic coverage.
And we'd also like to remind you, if you ever see a photo you like in any one of our galleries, it is available for just $7. You can click on that small shopping cart icon to the bottom right, follow that prompt, and purchase as many of those as you would like. But if you scroll down the site, you've probably noticed we take a lot of photos from these games we're at, and we put all of those in our Big Country Preps photo archive. So make sure you check that out. Photos dating all the way back to 2018. But these photos are something we enjoy doing, and it's something we're very proud of here at BigCountryPreps.com.
All Big Country, all high school, all the time. Welcome home.